California man finds a long-lost logbook from the Pearl Harbor attacks sitting in a box of books. The National Archives has since recovered the book, which contains more than 500 pages of daily logs from the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard between March 1941 and June 1942. The National Archives recently announced the recovery of a rare Navy logbook detailing the attack on Pearl Harbor as it was happening. After sitting in storage for 50 years, the volume is now available to the American public. The logbook, covering the period between March 1941 and June 1942, records daily entries from the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, including vessel movements, ships undergoing repairs, and other operational details. Most notably, though, it also includes meticulous contemporaneous notes of the Japanese attack on December 7, 1941, a lesser-known secondary attack on March 4, 1942, Operation K, and the repair of the USS Yorktown following the Battle of the Coral Sea. In a press statement, Jim Byron, senior advisor to the acting archivist, thanked the historically conscious California couple for returning the logbook to the American people. Still, there was a very real possibility that this valuable piece of history may have been lost to time, if not for one woman's decision 50 years ago. The Pearl Harbor logbook was nearly trashed decades ago. As the Washington Post reported, this book nearly vanished into oblivion. During the 1970s, a woman named Oretta Kennedy was working as a civilian employee at the old Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California, and noticed the logbook in a trash bin. She happened to think it looked interesting and asked if she could keep it, according to her son, Michael William Bonds. They said, "Yeah, go ahead." Bonds said, "She brought it home to me. I was like 15 or so. I've had it ever since." Over the years, Bonds didn't think much of the book. It sat among his collection until recently, when his fiancée, Tracy Lynn Sharrett, found it during a move. Sharrett recognized the historical value of the book and decided to reach out to a rare bookseller to see if it had any monetary value. An entry written on December 7, 1941, reads, "At 0657, unknown submarine, Japanese, was attacked and sunk near entrance. At 0755, Japanese aircraft and submarines attacked Pearl Harbor and other military and naval objectives on Oahu. The man they contacted was Dan Whitmore, the founder of the Pasadena-based Whitmore Rare Books. Although his shop normally deals in literary first editions or books on philosophy, science, and economics, Whitmore said the logbook was a significant cultural object, and it got his attention. Still, he wasn't certain how much it would be worth. I don't know exactly what a retail price point would be for it." Whitmore said, "It could be a 6-figure object." No compensation for the couple. There was also concern that, despite nearly being trashed, the book was still technically government property. To clarify the legality of buying and selling the book, Whitmore reached out to the National Archives. "We didn't want to buy a problem or buy a headache, and we certainly didn't want to pass on a headache to potential customers." Whitmore explained, "We wanted to make sure that the National Archives didn't have a claim on it." As it turned out, officials from the National Archives did indeed consider the book to be government property, despite the fact that Kennedy had rescued it from the trash. Therefore, Bonds was asked to hand it over. In return, he was gifted 2 National Archives T-shirts. "I'd like to have gotten some compensation for it," Bonds said. "All I got was a T-shirt so far." Bonds noted that arrangements were also being made for him and his fiancée to tour the San Diego Navy base. The National Archives has catalogued the logbook and made it available to researchers and the public. Digital facsimiles of key sections, particularly entries for December 6 to 8, 1941, are now viewable online. Archivists are planning conservation work to ensure the physical artifact is preserved. Moving forward, historians will study its entries in relation to other Pearl Harbor documentation, such as deck logs, reports, and dispatches. The logbook may help resolve debates over timing, command communications, and the extent of readiness prior to the attack. Pearl Harbor Battle of Midway legacy continues. 81 years ago this week, sailors and civilians turned the tide of the war in the Pacific. The shipyard each of us call home today played a pivotal role ensuring our Pacific fleet was ready to surprise the Imperial Japanese Navy at the Battle of Midway. A couple weeks before the carrier USS Yorktown CV-5 would arrive at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, Navy cryptologists, linguists, and intelligence personnel broke IJN's code in the basement of our historic Building 1 at what was then called Station Hypo. The no-ka-oi best work of this team, who were forerunners of modern information warriors, gave the Navy critical intelligence to secure its first major naval victory against Japan at the Battle of Midway in World War II. On May 28, 1942, a war-torn and battle-damaged Yorktown floated into the very same dry dock number 1 where USS Hawaii SSN 776 now sits. A 3-month repair estimate from the shipyard was announced. However, intelligence analysts from Station Hypo had convinced Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz that the IJN would strike Midway Island June 4, 1942, resulting in a near-impossible repair timeline to return Yorktown to the fleet. 3 days. This is when our no-ka-oi legacy was created. With water still draining from the dry dock, our civilian workforce wasted no time getting the ship back into fighting shape. More than 1,400 tradesmen would work around the clock for 72 hours to get the job done. Even our island community contributed with a series of rolling blackouts throughout Oahu to support the vast electricity needed for the enormous welding effort. Then, on the morning of May 30th, with shipyard workers still on board finalizing repairs, Yorktown steamed out of the Pearl Harbor Channel on a course straight to the battleground of one of the most decisive victories in history. In 1942, ahead of the Battle of Midway, our workforce saw the unprecedented challenge of Yorktown and met it with no-ka-oi work and effort. 81 years later, the legacy continues of repairing our fleet's force on time, every time. Just last week, USS Michael Murphy completed her maintenance period 3 days early. Pacific Fleet, the most combat-ready naval force on the planet, is supported by the vital maintenance done at PHNSY and IMF. Today's workforce continues the no-ka-oi spirit set by those who have gone before us, those who did not back down, did not give up, and gave their best. Our challenges may be different, but our dedication remains the same. They were no-ka-oi, we are no-ka-oi. Surface ship repair culture needs a refit. Surface ship repair maintenance is not ready to meet the demands a high-end conflict would place on it in the coming decade. U.S. Navy surface ships exit a repair period on time, less than 50% of the time fleet-wide, even with recent improvements in maintenance timelines. 1. Since 2018, the Surface Navy has enjoyed increased efficiency with integrated production schedules and a tighter relationship between industry and the Navy. There are still, however, more improvements to be made. While there is plenty of advice and debate on how to improve ship maintenance, what should not be up for discussion is that the solution should be multifaceted. What is often avoided but should be considered is the role culture needs to play in correcting the systemic issues that have plagued the surface repair maintenance community for too long. A revamped culture, rich in honesty, historical heritage, and accountability, should be a part of a multi-layered approach to prepare the maintenance community for a great power war. Culture plays a crucial role in any organization's direction. It is a foundation of desirable traits and core beliefs to guide present and future decisions by individuals and sub-organizations. From the perspective of many leaders in the surface warfare community, the culture within the repair maintenance domain allows missed timelines and budgets and is unconcerned as to when a ship is needed back in the fleet based on the optimized fleet response plan. This needs to change. Truth in reporting. The surface repair maintenance culture must embody honest and timely reporting. even if this means reporting bad news. As a career surface warfare officer, and especially during my time in command, I have heard multiple times that missed deadlines or milestones must be carefully messaged to mitigate the risk of either the lead maintenance activity forfeiting awards or contractors taking their foot off of the pedal. In other words, releasing negative news about the schedule too soon may have adverse consequences for the overall performance of the lead maintenance activity. There are two problems with this mindset. First, in my experience, being secretive about delays has never motivated a maintenance team to meet a milestone. Problem number two, and most significant, is that hiding delays in the schedule erodes trust among the ship, Navy leaders, and the maintenance activity. In the spirit of former Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Michael Gilday's mandate to get real and get better, the maintenance community should embrace the red, accept unfavorable reports on the status of a program or process as soon as possible. Bad news does not get better with time. Truthful and timely reporting of missed milestones may risk the lead maintenance activity missing an award tied to a milestone or slackening its effort. However, two key benefits outweigh these risks. Truthful and timely reporting builds team cohesion. Successful organizations use brutal honesty and transparency to maintain strong teamwork. Daniel Coyle, author of The Culture Code, The Secrets of Highly Successful Groups, explains that vulnerability is one of the core attributes embedded in the cultures of highly successful organizations. 2. Vulnerability both precedes and sustains trust. When the lead maintenance activity or shipyard openly admits there is a possibility of missing a deadline, and it is done early enough to be corrected, there will be a higher chance the team, both civilian and military, will respond to meet the deadline. Maintenance community leaders could elevate these concerns and fight their way to resolution. Honesty, transparency, and vulnerability improve teamwork. Concealing the truth does the opposite. Prompt and truthful reporting spawn ingenuity to improve timelines and meet milestones. For instance, suppose a maintenance milestone such as an engineering light-off assessment date is unlikely to be met on time, and the entire maintenance community is aware of this potential delay. i.e., when the delay in a part's arrival is known. In that case, all parties can think of creative ways to mitigate the time loss. Truthfulness and vulnerability do not guarantee ingenuity. However, the propensity for creativity is greater when everyone accepts that a milestone is in jeopardy. Making a culture change is easier said than done. Unfortunately, inside all military services is the temptation to, at times, falsely report meeting standards or stretch the truth to meet increasing demands and pressures. 3. This challenge makes honesty difficult, but it should not be an excuse for not having an open and honest dialogue when shortfalls arise. The importance of historical heritage. The USS Yorktown CV-5, undergoing repairs at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard in 1942. It was estimated her repairs would take 90 days to complete, but knowing she was vital to the fight, Admiral Chester Nimitz gave the maintenance team 72 hours to get the Yorktown seaworthy and battle-ready, a challenge it met. U.S. Naval Institute Photo Archive. The Navy maintenance culture must be infused with history and war-fighting relevance. As an anecdote, the service can look at the World War II success of Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. This shipyard was thrust in the spotlight preceding the Battle of Midway in May 1942. The USS Yorktown, CV-5, took considerable damage during the Battle of the Coral Sea. 6 compartments were destroyed, as were various electrical systems on 3 decks and across 24 frames. She had lost her radar and refrigeration system, and near misses by 8 bombs had opened seams in her hull and ruptured her fuel oil compartments. Repairs were estimated to require at least 90 days to complete. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the Pacific Fleet commander, gave the maintenance team 72 hours to repair the ship well enough to put her back to seas for an anticipated battle at Midway, which would prove to be a turning point in the war. On receiving Nimitz's time frame, the maintenance community got right to work, successfully meeting the deadline with time to spare. Several factors aided these Herculean efforts. First, the country was at war with a bold, relentless adversary. Nimitz waived certain safety measures to speed the process. Second, the only repairs that were addressed were those deemed urgent and necessary to get the ship back to sea and able to launch aircraft. The Yorktown sailed into the Battle of Midway with many repair items left untended. Third, the crew, motivated to get their ship back in the fight, helped the maintenance team make necessary repairs. These efforts could not be easily replicated today. There are differences in systems, analog versus digital, the environment, wartime versus peace, and safety codes, which contrast the efforts of the greatest generation during a massive global conflict with the peacetime efforts our generation can muster today. None of these factors should dilute the maintenance team's noble accomplishment. The Yorktown was repaired well enough to get back to the fight in less than 72 hours. The Yorktown story should be told at every shipyard, not just in Pearl Harbor, with patches, ball caps, and other command paraphernalia with the Yorktown silhouette in their backgrounds. This impressive accomplishment against unfavorable odds should be an inspirational narrative, one that should serve as an example for every shipyard, a maintenance organization and community that answers the call of the fleet with unflinching resolve. History is crucial in fostering and supporting a strong organizational culture. For surface warriors, every ship has a story associated with its namesake. Maintenance availabilities should tie in the historical role of the ship's namesake. Furthermore, the surface ship maintenance community should embrace wins throughout history. History that motivates does not need to be in the distant past. For instance, many Pacific Fleet surface warfare officers can recall the success of Vigor Industrial and the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in the 2010s. For during this time, 2 aircraft carrier maintenance availabilities were completed on time or early, and the maintenance community also completed the USS Kidd DDG-100 availability on time and under budget. The maintenance community should celebrate wins in the distant and recent past to inspire a culture of sustained, high-level performance. A maintenance material manager on board the USS George Washington CVN-73, which is undergoing a refueling complex overhaul at Newport News Shipyard, instructs sailors on how to properly extinguish a fire. Extended availabilities affect not only war-fighting readiness, but also the emotional and mental health of the sailors involved. U.S. Navy Nicholas A. Russell, the third ingredient needed for successful culture is accountability. Consider 2 opposing examples. In 2017, the Surface Navy commenced an extensive, comprehensive review following 2 fatal collisions that summer. The community was determined to identify the root causes of its shortfalls and take corresponding corrective actions to prevent the problems that led to the tragic loss of 17 sailors from happening again. As a result, more than 100 immediate corrective actions were identified. Since then, the surface warfare community has enhanced maritime and navigation training across all officer ranks and continues to make strides in this area. Another example is from my experience as commanding officer of the USS Hopper DDG-70. Before we entered our extended availability in June 2018, what was forecast to be a 14-month yard period was altered twice and eventually settled to be 21 months. Roughly 12 months into the maintenance period, the availability was extended yet another 6 months without my or my squadron commander's knowledge. In the end, after several more delays, the Hopper exited the maintenance period nearly 3 years after it started. During my time on board, as the ship missed deadlines and decision points, my pleas for a critical process review to determine a root cause were, for the most part, ignored. Throughout my time in the maintenance period, we conducted just one informal review following a 6-week delay in removing the ship's shafts. The Hopper's maintenance team was up against some hurdles. Pier loading was a significant problem. 3 other ships also were being worked on with large maintenance projects. At the time, Pearl Harbor was designed to have only 2 surface ships in significant maintenance periods at once. Also, key contractor positions, including welders, were prioritized away from the Hopper, as her maintenance project was deemed able to absorb the schedule risk. However, those obstacles should not have led to almost 2 additional years to repair and upgrade a destroyer. These delays represent a flawed business practice and should not be accepted as the status quo. A higher level of critical review of surface ship repair maintenance is one of the keys to breaking this status quo. It is not enough to demand that more ships get delivered out of a CNO availability on time. A critical, objective review in the form of an investigative inquiry should be required every time a surface ship does not exit an availability on schedule. Investigations should not have punishment as their objective, but should focus on discovering inefficiencies in a process and finding ways to improve in a particular area. For example, near-miss critiques used by the Nuclear Officer Corps and increasingly used in the surface warfare community are a good model for accountability for shortfalls or inefficiencies without reprimand, reprisal, or blame. The maintenance community should use something similar whenever a milestone is missed or when a ship does not exit an availability on time. Mediocrity and failure should no longer be rewarded with complicit silence. While blame or punishment does not need to be the center of the solution, holding key leaders accountable for a ship's maintenance schedule would prove helpful. As a career surface warfare officer, I never knew the key person or people who would be held accountable for keeping my ship's maintenance availabilities on time and on budget. However, as a commanding officer, I was aware of the key players in the Hopper's availability: the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard Commanding Officer and Project Manager, the Surface Maintenance Lead, the BAE Lead Manager, my Commodore, and myself. However, the person who ultimately would be responsible for the availability's success or failure should have been clarified to all parties. If the Navy wants better accountability, a person or organization should be given the responsibility and commensurate authority to ensure the schedule is on track. Not just a warfighting readiness problem. There should be a clear understanding of what is at stake when a surface ship enters an extended availability and becomes delayed. The stakes are not just fleet assets late getting to the fight in times of conflict. There are emotional and psychological impacts on sailors as well. 5. Not every sailor wants to be on a ship constantly underway. However, all sailors want to feel relevant and valuable. When sailors are involved in extended yard periods, they mostly are pulled away from what they were trained to do: maintain and operate their equipment and, in the case of junior officers, learn to drive and fight the ship. When an availability starts for a sailor, what begins as a feeling of relief because of a reduced operational tempo can quickly turn into anxiety, helplessness, and at times disdain, as weeks in the yard turn into months. In the case of half-life or modernization availabilities, months can turn into years. The maintenance community owes it to sailors to do better, because it can. There is little doubt that sailors, civilians, and contractors at every level will rise to the occasion should conflict require ships to be repaired and returned to battle rapidly. The Navy would be better served, however, with a surface repair community that is organized, motivated, and held accountable to repair ships on time. Fixing the maintenance culture is not a magic pill or the lone solution. Culture is only one piece of a multi-pronged approach that will help the maintenance community get real and get better. But the Navy and the nation deserve a surface maintenance community that embraces truth in reporting, historical pride, and unwavering accountability. World War II, USS Wasp CV-18, USS Wasp CV-18 was an Essex-class aircraft carrier built for the U.S. Navy. It saw extensive service in the Pacific during World War II and continued to be of service after the war until it was decommissioned in 1972. Design and construction designed in the 1920s and early 1930s, The U.S. Navy's Lexington and Yorktown-class aircraft carriers were intended to conform to the limitations set forth by the Washington Naval Treaty. This agreement placed restrictions on the tonnage of various types of warships, as well as capped each signatory's total tonnage. These types of limitations were reaffirmed in the 1930 London Naval Treaty. As worldwide tensions increased, Japan and Italy left the treaty structure in 1936. With the collapse of the agreement, the U.S. Navy commenced designing a new, larger type of aircraft carrier and one which drew from the lessons learned from the Yorktown class. The resulting class was longer and wider, as well as included a deck-edge elevator. This had been used earlier on USS Wasp CV-7. In addition to carrying a larger number of aircraft, the new design mounted a greatly enhanced anti-aircraft armament. Dubbed the Essex class, the lead ship, USS Essex, CV-9, was laid down in April 1941. This was followed by USS Oriskany, CV-18, which was laid down on March 18, 1942, at Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts. Over the next year and a half, the carrier's hull rose on the ways. In the fall of 1942, Oriskany's name was changed to Wasp to recognize the carrier of the same name which had been torpedoed by EA-19 in the Southwest Pacific. Launched on August 17, 1943, Wasp entered the water with Julia M. Walsh, daughter of Massachusetts Senator David Thirst Walsh, serving as sponsor. With World War II raging, workers pushed to finish the carrier, and it entered commission on November 24, 1943, with Captain Clifton A. F. Sprague in command. USS Wasp, CV-18, Overview Nation, United States type, Aircraft Carrier Shipyard, Bethlehem Steel, Fore River Shipyard, Hyde Down, March 18, 1942. Launched August 17, 1943. Commissioned November 24, 1943. Fate scrapped 1973. Specifications displacement 27,100 tons length, 872 feet. Beam 93 feet. Draft 34 feet, 2 inches. Propulsion 8x boilers, 4x Westinghouse geared steam turbines, 4x shafts, speed 33 knots. Complement 2,600 men, armament 4 times. Twin 5-inch 38 caliber guns 4 times, single, 5-inch 38 caliber guns 8 times, quadruple 40mm 56 caliber guns 46 times single, 20mm 78 caliber guns 90 to 100 aircraft entering combat. Following a shakedown cruise and alterations in the yard, Wasp conducted training in the Caribbean before departing for the Pacific in March 1944. Arriving at Pearl Harbor in early April, the carrier continued training, then sailed for Majuro, where it joined Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher's Fast Carrier Task Force. Mounting raids against Marcus and Wake Islands to test tactics in late May, Wasp commenced operations against the Marianas the following month, as its planes struck Tinian and Saipan. On June 15th, aircraft from the carrier supported Allied forces as they landed in the opening actions of the Battle of Saipan. 4 days later, Wasp saw action during the stunning American victory at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. On June 21st, the carrier and USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, were detached to mop up fleeing Japanese forces. Though searching, they were not able to locate the departing enemy. War in the Pacific moving north in July, Wasp attacked Iwo Jima and Chichijima before returning to the Marianas to launch strikes against Guam and Rota. That September, the carrier began operations against the Philippines before shifting to support the Allied landings on Peleliu. Replenishing at Manus after this campaign, Wasp and Mitcher's carriers swept through the Ryukyus before raiding Formosa in early October. This done, the carriers began raids against Luzon to prepare for General Douglas MacArthur's landings on Leyte. On October 22nd, 2 days after the landings commenced, Wasp departed the area to replenish at Ulithi. 3 days later, with the Battle of Leyte Gulf raging, Admiral William Bull Halsey directed the carrier to return to the area to provide assistance. Racing west, Wasp took part in the later actions of the battle, before again departing for Ulithi on October 28th. The remainder of the fall was spent operating against the Philippines, and in mid-December the carrier weathered a severe typhoon. Resuming operations, Wasp supported landings at Lingayen Gulf, Luzon in January 1945, before taking part in a raid through the South China Sea. Steaming north in February, the carrier attacked Tokyo before turning to cover the invasion of Iwo Jima. Remaining in the area for several days, Wasp's pilot provided ground support for the Marines ashore. After replenishing, the carrier returned to Japanese waters in mid-March and began raids against the home islands. Coming under frequent air attack, Wasp sustained a severe bomb hit on March 19th. Conducting temporary repairs, the crew kept the ship operational for several days before it was withdrawn. Arriving at Puget Sound Navy Yard on April 13th, Wasp remained inactive until mid-July. Fully repaired, Wasp steamed west July 12th and attacked Wake Island. Rejoining the fast carrier task force, it again began raids against Japan. These continued until the suspension of hostilities on August 15th. 10 days later, Wasp endured a second typhoon, though it sustained damage to its bow. With the end of the war, the carrier sailed for Boston, where it was fitted with extra accommodations for 5,900 men. Placed in service as part of Operation Magic Carpet, Wasp sailed for Europe to aid in returning American soldiers home. With the end of this duty, it entered the Atlantic Reserve Fleet in February 1947. This inactivity proved brief, as it moved to the New York Navy Yard the following year for an SCB-27 conversion to allow it to handle the U.S. Navy's new jet aircraft. Post-war years joining the Atlantic Fleet. In November 1951, Wasp collided with USS Hobson 5 months later and sustained severe damage to its bow. Quickly repaired, the carrier spent the year in the Mediterranean and conducting training exercises in the Atlantic. Moved to the Pacific in late 1953, Wasp operated in the Far East for much of the next 2 years. In early 1955, it covered the evacuation of the Taishan Islands by nationalist Chinese forces before departing for San Francisco. Entering the yard, Wasp underwent an SCB-125 conversion, which saw the addition of an angled flight deck and a hurricane bow. This work was finished late that fall, and the carrier resumed operations in December. Returning to the Far East in 1956, Wasp was redesignated as an anti-submarine warfare carrier on November 1st. Transferring to the Atlantic, Wasp spent the rest of the decade conducting routine operations and exercises. These included forays into the Mediterranean and working with other NATO forces. After aiding a United Nations airlift in Congo during 1960, the carrier returned to normal duties. In the fall of 1963, Wasp entered the Boston Naval Shipyard for a fleet rehabilitation and modernization overhaul. Completed in early 1964, it conducted a European cruise later that year. Returning to the East Coast, it recovered Gemini 4 on June 7, 1965, at the completion of its spaceflight. Reprising this role, it recovered Geminis 6 and 7 that December. After delivering the spacecraft to port, Wasp departed Boston in January 1966 for exercises off Puerto Rico. Encountering severe seas, the carrier suffered structural damage, and following an examination at its destination, soon returned north for repairs. After these were completed, Wasp resumed normal activities before recovering Gemini 9 in June 1966. In November, the carrier again fulfilled a role for NASA when it brought on board Gemini 12. Overhauled in 1967, Wasp remained in the yard until early 1968. Over the next 2 years, the carrier operated in the Atlantic, while making some voyages to Europe and participating in NATO exercises. These types of activities continued into the early 1970s, when it was decided to remove the Wasp from service. In port at Quonset Point, RI for the final months of 1971, The carrier was formally decommissioned on July 1, 1972. Stricken from the Naval Vessel Register, Wasp was sold for scrap on May 21, 1973.